I'm on. Can you hear me now? Good to see you. We're going to go to tell the story of Jesus today. I need somebody who wants to sing that as a solo. Anybody? There you go. We need to think about it. Everybody remember that song? Tell me the story of Jesus, right in my heart every word. Tell me the story most precious, sweetest that ever's been heard. You never learned it. All right. Well, great. Maybe I'll read it at the end. So anyway, we're here to go through the Gospels quickly or an overview in 1 hour. We're looking forward to that. And as soon as Jerry sits down, I'm going to start. How's Jerry doing? Better. All right. He's reminding me to turn off our telephones, right?
I did.
All right. Very, very good. Great to see you. Everybody doing well. We're praying for the Juillet family, and the funeral is Saturday. So it is what it is. God will guide them in that, and so we're thankful for that. But other than that, let's have a word of prayer. Father, today we thank you that we can come together and worship you in spirit and in truth, and to rely upon you completely for everything we do. Thankful that truth sets us free, and we pray that today as we study the Bible, as we study the Gospels, we will be refreshed and renewed in our understanding of the story of Jesus. We thank you for that, and we pray it in Jesus' name. Amen. So last week we studied Galatians chapter 4, verse 4. In the fullness of time, God sent forth his Son. It's a really profound verse if you think about it. God sent forth his Son right on time, perfect timing, and I think he's going to come back in perfect timing. Everybody agree with that? Yeah. Not my time or your time. Glad for that. It's going to be his time. He'll know right when the right time is. Born of a woman, born under the law, that to redeem those who are under the law, that we might receive the adoption. So we talked about three major cultures, Romans, Greeks, and Jews, and their impact and why it was the fullness of time. Did anybody remember what the Romans brought to it?
Peace.
What is it?
Peace.
Peace and pavement.
Protection and population.
You got it. I like people who have notes. You know, you're really smart when you look at your notes and read them, right? Otherwise, what is there? Yeah, so that really set it up. Imagine going anywhere in your world, and you were protected, you had good roads, and there was peace, and you didn't have to worry about, people shooting at you or anything like that. Anybody want to be a missionary to Ukraine? Too much shooting going on there for me, right? So imagine that. How about the Greeks? What did they bring to the table? Common language. Common thought. They thought alike. Thinking and language go together. You know that. You can't be a French unless you know French. You can't understand the Greek people unless you learn Greek language. You just can't do it. So they always go together, and they had it both in common philosophy, whatever. How about the Jews? What was the fullness of time about the Jews? What was there in their history that made this a unique time for them, that made it just perfect for Jesus to come? They were scattered. All right, we're going to see a note here in a little bit. 4 million Jews were scattered over the world. Every city had a synagogue. So if you go on the Aegean Sea in Greece, there's this little island that now no people are on because they put everybody off. It's called Delos. And it was the center of the Greek Empire at one point, in a sense, and all the merchants and so came through there. And when you go there, they have all the ruins of everything, and guess what's right in the middle? Not perfectly in the middle, but right there was a synagogue. Wherever you went, there were the Jews, and they were preaching something and teaching something that no other religion had, and it was called monotheism, which when you think about it is just a profound, if you can have a religion where there's only one God, that's kind of like working for somebody and you only have one boss. That's really a good deal, right? And so the world was looking for it. So everything was ready. So in the fullness of time. One question we didn't answer there, did the New Testament replace the Old Testament? So some people don't even study the Old Testament because the New Testament is for us. The Old Testament was for then, et cetera, et cetera. But you and I understand the Old statement. The new is in the Old explained. The Old is in the new. The new is in the Old contained. The Old is in the new explained. In other words, they go together, even though they're distinct in some ways. And it's more Israel and more the church and all that kind of stuff. But you can't have one without the other. Is the God of the Old Testament different than the God of the New Testament? Many people believe that. The God of the Old Testament is a mean old bully, full of wrath and justice And the God of the New Testament is found in the person of Jesus. He's a God of love and mercy and forgiveness. So read the Psalms and see what David thought about his God. Always comes up. He's long-suffering. He's merciful. He's gracious. He's slow to anger. You know, the God of the Old Testament was love and mercy and grace as well. So we have to understand that. But today we're going to go to an overview of the Gospels. And this is all something you all know. So you're going to help me today. Ready? What do you know? That's what I thought. So that's why I'm going to teach. All right? You have your sheet. We could cover a million things, but hopefully as we get done today, you're ready to read the Gospels. There are how many of them again? Oh, good. At least you know that, right? How many synoptic Gospels? 3. At least we know that, so we understand that. So we're going to talk first about the land of Israel. And just to give you a perspective, it's pretty small. If you include all the desert, it's 200 miles, but most of that is desert. So the real land is 100 and about 85 miles wide at the furthest. From the Mediterranean Sea to Jerusalem is 35, 40 miles. From Jerusalem down to the Dead Sea is 15 miles. If you've ever taken the bus, you understand that. You're like there in a second. You understand that the land there's a good map of the topography of it, and you really sense that there was some differences in what it was. There are 4 bodies of water that usually are found in the Scripture. The Mediterranean Sea, often called the Great Sea. Just shoot them out. You got all the answers, right? The Dead Sea, also called the Dead Sea. All right. The Sea of Galilee, often called the Sea of Galilee, Gennesaret, etc. There are different names for them. And between the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea is a Jordan River. Great job. I like people get it right out there. So we think of the 4 items of water there. There are, topography-wise, there are 5 zones. So you've studied this, you've understood this. If you start at the Mediterranean Sea, there's the coastal plains. Today we have Tel Aviv, but it would be Caesarea Maritima, it would be Joppa, and around there. The unique thing about the land of Israel, it has, and especially the coastline, other than Haifa, which is not a good harbor, they have no harbors. And if you've ever been to Joppa, you remember that's where the wood came in for Solomon's temple and where Peter went to Joppa, whatever. If you ever saw it, you'd walk right by it and not know it was a harbor. It's so small. It's just nothing. There's no ship bigger than 30 foot wide that could get into that harbor. So they really have no harbors, which made it unique. In fact, it's a unique country, in fact, that the capital, the major city starts with J, Jerusalem, and it's not on a river. It's not on a coast. It's not on a railroad line. It doesn't have an airport. Why would you build a city there, right? Every major city in the world has a reason for existence, except Jerusalem as far as natural geography and topography. But anyway, we'll think about that. So there's a coastal plain along the Mediterranean Sea, and sometimes part of it is called the Shephelah. The sweet rose of Sharon is down there, gets a little bit of rain, et cetera, et cetera. The coastal hills, when you get out of that, you get into the Judean hills, and it's kind of rolling and whatever. And then you shoot up to the central mountains, and you get to Jerusalem and the backbone of the country. You have the Jordan Valley, which is also called the Rift Valley. Thank you, Pete. I like that. The Rift Valley starts at Caesarea Philippi and goes how far? Way down to southern Africa, Lake Victoria, Victoria Falls, right? So all the way down that, if you look at it, it's just the great Rift Valley, but this is the deepest part of it, so we'll think about that. And then the Eastern Plateau, when you go from Jerusalem, it's a high point, obviously, in the country. You always go up to Jerusalem because it is a high point in Jerusalem. And then it's all downhill, 4,500 feet down to the Dead Sea. Then it's back up about 2,500 feet to the Eastern Plateau. And there's a city there called Amman, Jordan, right? That sound familiar? Amman. So we understand the Ammonites, and so that is there. So let's just look at it from elevation so you can see the plains, the hill country, the backbone, the mountains, back down to the Rift Valley, and then up and across, and that's pretty flat out there when you get to Amman, Jordan, and from that point on. So you could say a lot about them. The coastal plain from Mount Carmel down to way down to what we call the Gaza Strip today, the coastal hills, Sweet Rose of Sharon, and all that kind of stuff. That's where a lot of the farming goes on. A lot of the land use is there, very good. They're the Central Mountains. You have to understand the Bible and especially the Gospel. You got to understand the backbone of the country, right? From Mount Carmel, which goes right out into the Mediterranean Sea, and Haifa's above it, all the way down to Jerusalem. And that's just the backbone of the country. It's a hill. It separates it. On this side, not much rain. On that side, they get the rain, that kind of stuff. So many of the hill things are there. If you look at the above Mount Carmel, you have the Jezreel Valley, and you remember that, Mount Megiddo and Armageddon and all that kind of stuff. So the Central Mountains really is a key part of it, with Jerusalem at the top of it. And maybe there you can see some of the mountains. Mount Hermon is way to the north, where they get snow and they have a ski resort, and up on top of it is the eyes of the world, right? So the Jews, when they took that in 19 whatever it is, they have never given that up. Because from there, with their big telescopes and microscopes and whatever the scopes are, they can see all the way from the north. They can see all of Lebanon. They can see all of Syria. They can see Amman, Jordan. They can see, of course, Israel. They can see Cairo down to the south. On a clear day, they can see everything. So that's that. And you have Mount Hermon. You have Mount Nebo and some other ones. This is Mount... That's Mount, whoops, there we go. If you ever get a chance to go to Mount Hermon, you will do that. You'll never get to the top, very big military things. You'll never get there. But if you can get as close as you can, the Druze live up there, that unique group of religious people. Once in a while, there's bombs laying around that haven't exploded, so stay away from them. But anyway, it's a very unique place, and it goes up. They get a lot of rain on that mountain. That's why Caesarea Philippi, which is at the bottom of it, has that water just gushing out. 4 rivers come out of that mountain, and they're just major rivers right out of the mountain. So a lot of rain up there. The Jordan Valley, of course, goes all the way from the Sea of Galilee down to the Dead Sea. And, of course, the Rift Valley keeps going from there. Just a couple things about it. Sea of Galilee is not that big. You have to catch that when Jesus is on the Sea of Galilee. And they have storms. You think, what could go wrong here, right? We're never more than 3 miles from the shore, right? How could I ever drown in this lake? But if you see it, you recognize that it has these mountains. It's just in a bowl, about 700 feet below sea level. And so it's way down. And so the winds come in. It's one of the winds. Anybody here like to windsurf? I tried it once. Tried is the key word. I never did get up, never did go, but I had tried for a long time until I wore out my arms. And one of the windsurfing capitals of the world, because the wind's at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. In fact, when you're on a boat in the afternoon there, as a tourist, the Israeli military has to have all kinds of boats out there to watch, because who knows which windsurfer doesn't have a bomb with them, right? And about the last thing you want is a windsurfer to come next to one of these tourist boats, throw a bomb on it, and take off, right? So it is really there. But you understand that's why they had the storms and all those kinds of things in the Sea of Galilee. By the way, if you would have gone there 5, 6, 7 years ago, the Sea of Galilee was down. It's the only freshwater lake basically in Israel, and it was down 40, 50 feet. You had to walk like a half mile from shore just to find water, and all the resorts, were non-existent because they were just using too much water. So Israel, like normal, they said, we got to fix this. So today they sell water. So we live in a place called Phoenix, and we're running out of water. We just need those Jews to come over here and tell us how to do it. And we will be selling water, A couple of things. They have drip irrigation, obviously. They learned how to catch the moisture in the air, with these great big moisture-catching, like, nets. And so anyway, the Sea of Galilee now is just too full. So they have to pump it out and sell it to Jordan and to irrigate the farmers' land over there. They turned it around. So it's doable. I'm not really happy when I see Lake Mead go down, but I know if we really put our mind to it, we could fill that dude up. real easy because it's been done. The Jordan River, as you know, is not much of a river, even in the days of Joshua and so, but in flood stage, it sometimes gets floody, pretty wide and whatever, but basically it's just a little creek. And there are places you can canoe on it, but mainly you could not. It was there, of course, where Jesus was baptized and John the Baptist was baptized. And the Dead Sea, of course, is the lowest point on earth at 1,400 and some feet below sea level, and it's dropping 1 inch every week. Every week it goes down another inch. So when I was there in 1987 till now, that's a lot of weeks and a lot of inches and a lot of years, right? So it will dry up. The whole southern part is dried up if they didn't pump water in. But they got a plan for that. What they're going to do? They're going to put a pipe from the Red Sea over the hill. You ever siphon? Once you get it going, you don't even need pumps. So if they want to fill it up, they can do that. That's just not an issue. The problem is they got to stop it. They can't fill it up too much. So right now it's really low, but they kind of like that. So the Eastern Plateau, of course, is in what we call the land of Jordan, and so we understand that. Geographically or land-wise, there are also these 5 political regions you have to remember. So Judea, you can see, is where Jerusalem, Bethlehem, those kinds of places is. Judea was considered the big tribe, right? And Ephraim was called the powerful tribe. And Sunday morning, when we studied Judges, we're going to talk about the Benjamites, who were the left-handed sling throwers and whatever. But the Judeans were the big ones. They had Jerusalem, et cetera, et cetera. You have Samaria, of course, the half-breeds that were left from the captivity of the Assyrians. Galilee would be to the north. So you see, going from Galilee to Judea, usually we'd go through Samaria. That's why in John 4, Jesus was with the Samaritan woman, but most Jews wouldn't do that because, first of all, it's dangerous, and secondly, you didn't like the Samaritans. They were dogs or uncircumcised. So Galilee to the north, Judea down to the south, Samaria in between, Perea, which would be across what we call today Jordan, that Jesus will have ministry there. That tends to be more, even in Jesus' day, it was less Jews and more Gentiles over there, Roman cities, etc. And then the Decapolis, which means what? Polis is city, Deca is 10 cities, all right? So the 10 cities on the other side of the Sea of Galilee and down below it. So they'll give you, so when you're reading the New Testament, especially the Gospels in particular, they're in Samaria, they're in Judea, they're in Galilee, they're in Perea, they're up in the Decapolis where the pigs became demon-possessed and all that kind of good stuff was up there. So you can understand that. Here's just a map of the roads. And I know you can't really see it, but along the coast, obviously, was the red line, and that was the King's Highway. That's where the military might would march through there. They'd go through the city of Megiddo, through that little pass of Megiddo, and then shoot down the coast to Gaza and down to Egypt. If they were going to do anything militarily, that's where that would be. You can see on the other side, way over in Amman, Jordan, there'd be a major road. That was also called the King's Highway. And that would go down to what we now know of as Petra. But that was important. But you see that Jerusalem's not on a major road, But Galilee is. And Nazareth was. So when Jesus was born and raised, Nazareth in that region was where the Romans had a huge presence. And so he had to live, even though he was Jewish, he had to live with the reality of a huge Roman presence and the army and the tax collectors, etc. So you can get a sense of that. So you can see, to go from Nazareth up there down to Jerusalem, you'd want to just follow the backbone of the mountain. That was a shortcut, but it went through Samaria, so most of them went down to the Jordan River, went all the way to Jericho, and then they would climb that 15 miles up, 4,500 feet to get to Jerusalem, those kinds of things. So you got to get the land in view, and you can Google that anytime. You can just in back of your Bible, I'm sure you have maps, but always remember. Then it makes sense. So when it says they went up to Jerusalem, why would it say that? Because they went up. All right. The other thing that's unique, and I know you know this probably because I said it 100 times. All of my maps are northerly centered, right, or oriented. like we're the only people in the world who do that. What's the orientation of a Jewish map? Always eastern, yeah. Remember, the temple faced east. Everything's east, right? So this map should be turned like that if you were a Jew. They look at our maps and go, why is the north up here? It should be over here, right? So they're easterly oriented. The temple, everything was eastern. Jesus is coming from the east, et cetera, et cetera. So everything's easterly oriented. And if you think about it, the Hebrew words for east, so Hebrew is one of those languages that doesn't have a lot of words, right? So whereas English has, 120 to 150,000 words, depends on how many you count. Hebrew has, if you got 3,000 of them, you got it. You pretty much have it. So that's easy to learn, but impossible to master, just because you got to figure out how you say it. So they don't even have numbers. That's why when you read in the Old Testament numbers, there can be debate, because they don't have words. They don't have numbers like we have, 1,000 or whatever. This letter means this, and this means this, and you got to know that, right? So the word for east is in front of you. The word for west is behind you. The word for north is on your left. Am I doing this right? I got it backwards. And the word for south is right. So those are their words. And they went right. That means they went south. They went left. That means they went north, et cetera, et cetera. So you got to get the geography right. And it's always interesting. If you ever get a chance to go there, it'll really, really make sense. So the life in the time of Jesus. So who can tell me 4 things they know about life in the time of Jesus? In other words, who can read? Nobody? Thank you, Judy. I know somebody can read. There was widespread poverty. So you have to get that. So when we get to Matthew 11, you realize that by and large, the people were pretty poor. There were always rich people. There's always a rich you have among you, but they had a lot of poverty, and Jesus would walk into that world. What was the second one? Anybody guess? You're all afraid to say it, right? Subsistence living, which means? Yeah, they don't have big corporations, and they all make the cars, and we all make this, subsistence living, and they had high taxes by Rome. So you got to remember this. They're poor people trying to eke out I'm a fisherman or a farmer or whatever, but I got to grow my own crops. I got to do everything on my own. And they're just trying to live, trying to exist. And then the Romans come along, and guess what? The tax collectors were not very popular, right? Because they sat at the corners of the road, and when you went by, they figured out a way that they got the right to tax you, and they always took more than they deserved. So that was true. What did Matthew, is it 11, verse 28, right? Come unto me. Somebody say it loud. Come unto me.
All you who are heavily burdened.
Yeah. I'll give you rest. Right? Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I am meek and lowly of heart. You'll find rest for your soul, for my yoke is well-fitting. Anybody ever carry water in 2 buckets on it with a yoke, like the old system, right? And when you use your dad's yoke and you're a little kid, it doesn't fit. It hurts. So you always had a yoke that was your size, right? It's easy. It fits. It doesn't chafe. It doesn't hurt, right? For my yoke is easy. And the burden on it is, anybody want to work for Jesus? Just think, it's a light load with a good yoke. So you can see why his message would resonate with the people. They were subsistent, living, poverty-stricken, highly taxed people who were ready for something different, okay? How about sects in the time of Jesus, or groups maybe in the time of Jesus? And you have read these. So here are the 5 or 6. I guess I got 6 up there. So we all know about the Pharisees. They were conservative. They started in the days of the Maccabees. And actually Nehemiah's day was the first Pharisee. The Maccabees called them the Pharisees. That was the first time. The word Pharisee means separatist. So we're separated from evil, and we're separated to righteousness. Boy, I'd hate to meet a guy like that, wouldn't you? I mean, that's terrible. God would never want us to separate from evil and to righteousness, would he? Oh, he would, wouldn't he? Right. So they were the heroes, all right? They got a problem when they became, with time they came up with all these rules. But anyway, initially they were the good guys. And Nicodemus was a Pharisee, right? So we understand there were a lot of really good ones. Their intention was to separate from evil and to live righteously and to know the law so they could do that. And some of them got off track, and Jesus had to deal with the Pharisees, and we think they're all bad boys, but they really weren't. Over half of them we would have liked. And they were always a good neighbor. You always wanted them a Pharisee next door because they didn't steal, and on it goes. They were good. The Sadducees, they were the liberals of the day. They were the rationalists. So they didn't believe in, tell me some of the things they didn't believe in. Resurrection. Did you have another one? Angels. So all these things that, you know what a liberal Christian is, right? A liberal Christian doesn't really believe there's a God, doesn't really believe the Bible's true, doesn't believe there are miracles, doesn't really believe a lot of stuff, right? Doesn't believe Jesus was born of a virgin. I mean, those are all things that, you can't believe that stuff, right? So the Sadducees were like that. They're rational. I only believe what I see. I only believe what science tells me. Who could ever justify resurrection? That could never happen. Who could ever justify there are angels? So if you throw God out and miracles out and God's ability to do the things that we all accept him to have power to do and does, then we believe in inspiration. We believe in angels. We believe in resurrection. We believe in all that stuff too, because God can do it. Well, when you don't, you become a Sadducee or a liberal. So they were the rationalists of the day. And so they were the two main groups that you think of. The Essenes, I bet you can come up with a word that ends with ISTS. Isolationists. They said, hey, this world's going to pieces. I'm getting out of here. And I'm going to show you a picture where they live. So they were the isolationists, and they had their little rules and all that thing. So if you've ever been to Qumran, you've been there. Herodians. Herod would be the key to that word, all right? So Rome ruled, and so they were the syncretists. Syncretist means you mix together. So I'm going to be a Jew and a Roman. I'm going to be a follower of God and a follower of Rome. So because there was money in it, and there was no persecution in it. So syncretism is really, really popular if you don't want persecution, if you don't want pressure from anybody. Many religions are syncretistic, and many times Christian groups are syncretistic. I'm just going to get along with them. You want me to stand up? I'll stand up. You want me to sit down? I'll sit down. I'll do whatever you want. And if you go, for example, to Bolivia, and you go to Copacabana, is that the name? How you say that? The town up on the mountain there, and they have the 14 stations of the cross and whatever. And you watch the priests there. You go, this is weird. It really is weird what they're doing, and you realize it's syncretism. So they took the religion of highlands of Bolivia, right? And then they put Catholicism with it, and they mixed them. And it's just this, you're looking at it like, this is weird. You can't even explain it. So the Herodians were like that. I'm going to have one foot in the Jewish world and one foot in the Roman world, and I'm going to get along with everybody, and we're going to do just everything. The publicans were the tax collectors, and they were the opportunists. Man, I got a chance to make money. I'm going to do that. And, of course, the zealots were the revolutionaries and the activists, and they said, we got to fight this thing called Rome and fight this thing called taxation. And so they were the whatever. So I'll just quickly jump through some of these things, if I can. Whoops, there we go. There's where the Essenes would have lived, perhaps. This is Qumran, as you know. And there are villages up there, remains of villages. So they just went out to the desert and said, we're getting away from the world. We're going to isolate. We're going to have the rules of God run us. We're not going to have to deal with this Roman stuff or Pharisees or anything like that. The other ones are sometimes called the fourth philosophy, which was where the Herodians and publicans were kind of going with Rome, and then the zealots said, no, we're fighting Rome. So they were famous for this little sword, which is called a, you can hide it in here. Walk through a crowd and go. They were noted for the ability to take this Sakari sword, a little sword, under their thing, walk through crowds, and if you were a Roman soldier, for example, they could just walk by you and go, and they were noted for being able to hit you just below the fifth rib. They were really good at it. And what happens if you hit somebody with a sword just below the fifth rib? It kind of like really hurts, right into the heart. They were noted for that. So we understand all that's going on, right? In the days of Jesus, and you read the Gospels, and you read about a publican and a Pharisee and a Sadducee and whatever. On the other hand, there are another bunch of words that tell us you could be a Pharisee and a scribe, but these are more not just the sex, I'm a Pharisee, or I'm a Sadducee, or I'm a Herodian, I'm a publican, I'm a whatever. That's your group, if you would. But in that group, there are those who have this relationship to Judaism. The scribes, what does it mean to scribe? So who could write? Lawyers, all right? They were the students of the law. By the way, who is it here? Somebody asked me how to read the Bible or how to study the Bible, and I told them to write it out. So that makes you a scribe, which means if you write out the Bible, you're a student of the Bible. Have you done that? Write out Romans, one verse at a time. Write out whatever, one verse at a time. The king of Israel had to write out the law. Why? Reading it is like, writing it is like, I get it. That's why I've written out all the New Testament in Greek and in Hebrew or in English. You got to write it out. People say, "What do you do to study?" I say, "I just write it out." And when you write it, you get the detail up. So the scribes were the writers, the lawyers, the students of the Scripture. So you could be a Pharisee scribe, you could be any kind of other group scribe, but you were one who wrote out the law. The Sanhedrin was considered the high council, the 70 people who were noted for like the Supreme Court of Judaism, if you would. And Jesus would go before it, and Paul and others. The priests, there were 24 courses. They were scattered, but they had 24 groups, and you had a certain group had to be in Jerusalem at the temple at a certain time. The high priest was the head of Judaism. The temple then would be central to the whole Jewish culture and Jewish religion, and they didn't separate church and state. So to be a Jew religiously and to be a Jew politically was the same thing, right? So we have seen models of the temple area. This, of course, is the remains of it. We can go there. You've seen hundreds of pictures of that. You've seen the western wall where the temple would have probably been somewhere in front of that, or if you could go in and over, you would be there. And just to give you perspective, that's how big it is. It's monstrous. That's Lynette. And so she's, 5'2", and hardly covers one of those things, right? So the other part of Judaism in the days of Jesus was the synagogues. So you'll read about it. So there's a difference between the temple, which is where there's only one of them. That's where you worship. That's where the sacrifices, that's the whole 9 yards was there. The priest, all those kinds of things. And the synagogues were the local assemblies. So you could go to Nazareth today, and there's the remains of a synagogue they found. You can go to Nazareth, and you can find the remains of a synagogue there. And this is where the Jewish people who didn't live in Jerusalem and didn't go to the temple other than, at the major feasts like Passover or whatever, they would go to their local synagogue. Here's the one in Nazareth today that they found. It's probably where Jesus would have gone. The deals about the synagogue was that The Jewish people, there usually are 2 or 3 steps like that you can sit on, depends on which synagogue I've seen at least. And so you sit in those steps, if you would. They're not like chairs, they're like steps, and you sit on kind of like a sporting arena, if you would, right? And there'd be the Torah, the law would be up front, and then somebody would open it. And if you were a visiting Jewish person, they would often ask you to read the Torah. And so remember when Jesus went to the synagogue of Nazareth, he was asked to read it, and he stopped. Remember? He stopped at a unique place, and they're like, and then he said, today, this has been fulfilled in your presence. And they knew what he meant. Like, this is all talking about a coming Messiah that you need to accept. I'm here. They didn't particularly like that. They thought that was a little arrogant, right? Because they knew him, So those are the synagogues of the places. By the way, this little note here, Judaism was dynamic and differentiated. They had prayer, scripture, festival, worship, practice of law, temple sacrifices, etc. What I wanted you to see in the diasporas, 4 million, 7% of the Roman Empire was Jewish. They were hugely influential in the Roman Empire. And although 7% sounds small in one sense, in another sense, that's huge. You know Jews. You know people who are monotheists and worship on Sabbath and, cut their hair a weird way or whatever it is. You know these people. So people in the Roman Empire were exposed to this, and therefore they had influence. They had great influence. By the way, as you study, you realize the people of the Roman culture actually did appreciate the Jews in one sense. In other ways, they didn't like them. Jews tended to be very successful. And what's the source of all conflict? It's a 4-letter word, starts with E, N, envy, right? The guy who's successful, whatever. I told you I'd tell you one thing about Argentina. Drive down the road, you see a beautiful house, meaning somebody made it, right? What would you say? Wow. What'd you say? Beautiful. Good for them. What would a socialist say? This is just natural for them. It hit me. It overwhelmed me. Here's what they say. Wonder who he exploited. Anybody with a nice car, anybody with a nice house, wonder who he exploited. Now, if you really believe they exploited you, they were wrong in what they did to get what they have. Therefore, you are right to do what? Take it away from them. You have total rights to steal from the rich. Because they exploited somebody to get it. I knew that. Right? You never say, I wonder how hard they worked. You never say, I wonder if they inherited it. You never say, I wonder what business he started that happened to work out or whatever. It just came out of their mouth. I wonder who he exploited. And once that permeates your mindset, that anybody who's successful got there by exploiting or oppressing or injustice, game on. I get to take it back. I get to run into a store and take everything I want because they exploited somebody to get it, and therefore I have the right to get it back. So you realize that's what it was. So they did like the Jews. Periods in the life of Jesus, we'll just quickly hit this. There was his preparation, birth and boyhood, very short in the Gospels, but there is some, right? Couple chapters in Matthew and in Luke, not much in the others. His presentation, his baptism and temptation, Matthew and others would put that in there. His public ministry was to early Judea, and his first ministry was actually in Judea, in the temple. Remember, he cleansed the temple, and then he went back to Galilee. So most of his public ministry was in Galilee. But the problem was his public ministry. What's the source of conflict again? All right. And when you're really successful, if you're a Pharisee, this guy, he really draws the crowds. Nobody comes to hear me talk, right? So you're a Pharisee, you're dry as dust, you're boring as all get out. Nobody ever comes to hear a Pharisee talk. And everybody's going to hear Jesus talk. And they didn't like that. And so his public ministry ended in great conflict, as you know. And so as his popularity increases, his opposition also increased. And so eventually the Pharisees said, we got to do something about this. So what did he do? After first trying to convince the Pharisees, and that didn't work, you know, he went to a private ministry. So there's a whole section of the gospel which is the private ministry of Jesus Christ, the training of the 12. He said, I'm gonna lock in on 12 guys, and so that when I leave, I got 12 behind me to take over. He went to parables. Remember, parables were designed to reveal truth to those who had ears to hear and conceal truth from those who didn't want to hear it. So you tell a story, and if you didn't like them, you just missed it, right? But if you, remember he would say that in John 7:17, if any man wants to know the truth, he'll know the truth, whether it's of God or of man. You know, the problem isn't your intellect. The problem is your heart, your will. If anyone wills to do his will, if you want to know the truth, you will know the truth, all right? So when the Pharisees said to him, prove to us that you're the Son of God, or whatever they said to him, he goes, how many miracles do I have to do? How many times do I have to teach? How many demons do I have to throw out? I've kind of done a whole bunch of them already, and that's when he said, if anyone really wants to know the truth, you would know the truth, whether I'm of God or of man. So the problem was that. So we went to training of 12 parables, and then the discourses. That's his private ministry. Then near the end, as he gets to Caesarea Philippi, he says, who do men say that I am? And you remember that they get it right. You're the Christ, the Son of the living God. He goes, bam, you nailed it. Straight A on final exam, all right? Then it says, right in that context, he says, then he turned his head toward Jerusalem. All the way through the Gospel of John, his time was not yet, his time was not yet, his time was not yet, his time was now. So he said, I must go, I must suffer, I must die, and I must rise. And, of course, Peter said, never on our watch. And then Jesus says, get behind me, Satan. But there is the private ministry comes to an end, and he purposed, it says in the gospel, he purposed to go to Jerusalem. He set his eyes and his face and his life towards Jerusalem. And there would be the second Judean ministry, the latter one. He would go to the temple again, do it again, be rejected again. He would then run to Perea, cross the Jordan River, and he would minister there for a short period of time, come back to Jerusalem. When he came back to Jerusalem, he left Jericho, went up the hill, gets to the Mount of Olives, and then you have the whole last week and a half of his life. From the Mount of Olives going down at, O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how often would I have gathered you as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you would not. All those things happen in that last 2 weeks, if you would. So that's his Jerusalem ministry, his final ministry. He set his face, and he did it. He knew what was happening. No one else seemed to catch it, including his disciples. But anyway, they eventually would. So those are the periods in his life. By the way, if you ever want to, you can go to a harmony of the Gospels. Anybody know what a harmony of the Gospels is? Tell them what it is, Ed.
Where you blend them all together.
All right. So you got 4 Gospels, right? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And you'd say, so when he turned water to wine, where was that? Because it's recorded in this gospel, but it's not recorded in this one, so whatever. I remember when I was in seminary, we had a Chinese student. Chinese are brilliant, the ones at least that I ever had the privilege of being in the same class with. And they're always detail-oriented. They're like, got to get it all straight. So they're like engineers on steroids, right? They just have to get it straight. So this guy was determined to get all the events in the life of Christ in order. He was just determined. It's called a harmony of the Gospels. And in fact, he did his doctorate on it. There's a book he wrote. His name is Tan. Anyway, when he got all done, after all these hours and hours and hours and hours of working, and he was determined to get, the turning water to the wine came after this, became before this, he just wanted to get them all in order. You know what his answer was, what his statement was? You can't do it. So no harmony of the gospel is perfect. You cannot get them in order. Not because they weren't in order, not because the Bible is full of errors, but the authors, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, weren't trying to give you a chronological order necessarily. And so, you just got to take Matthew and then Mark and then Luke and then John and love it and enjoy it and realize if you're a chronology guy, you're going to go nuts, right? But it is chronological in other ways. The teachings of Jesus, obviously, he taught the multitudes on the Sea of Galilee, etc., up in the region of Galilee. Sermon on the Mount, the Beatitudes, the parables to reveal and conceal, Caesarea Philippi, Olivet Discourse. Here are some pictures. This is not the seats. They're growing tomatoes there now. They cover them with plastic. I just thought it looked like an amphitheater, right? And Jesus in the boat out there, and they're all 5,000 people listening. The Mount of Beatitudes right above it. And where he would have talked to his disciples. You've heard that it has been said. Go to Caesarea Philippi, that great river just coming out of that mountain. It's beautiful. And he would have said to his disciples, who do men say that I am? And then the Olivet Discourse, Matthew 24 and 25 is the main part of it, where he would have been coming down from the Mount of Olives. He was going to look at Jerusalem. Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem. He was going to make his discourse. He would go down into to the Last Supper, Gethsemane, et cetera, et cetera. So that's it. And of course, Matthew 24. As he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples asked him, tell us, when will these things be? Right? Remember Matthew 24 and 25. I'm going to jump across that one because you know that. I want you to go to this sheet that talks about the portraits of Jesus. As you read the four Gospels, you do ask the question, why four? Maybe you don't. Most of us didn't. But now you're going to, right? Many people ask why four. How many biographies of Abraham Lincoln? There's only one, right? Is there more than one biography of Abraham Lincoln? Really? How many biographies of Rich Van Heukelum? 0. I'm not important, right? Abraham Lincoln, there's quite a few, actually. George Washington? Quite a few, actually. And then they write another one. Like, why would you write another biography of George Washington? Everything that's ever been said has to have been said already, right? So you realize if you're really enamored with Winston Churchill or George Washington or any significant figure in your life, and more than one person gets enamored with that, there's going to be a whole bunch of biographies, people telling you, and they all have what? Point of view will be different, right? So one of them will be all details, like really great, has it all chronological. It's great if you want details. And others is like more their thoughts or whatever. They will have different perspectives. Does that mean they're all wrong? This one's true, this one's false? No, it's just of all the events in the life of Abraham Lincoln, which are you going to pick? And how are you going to communicate it? And in what order are you going to do it, right? So we all recognize that in biography. So when you look at Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you realize you have four portraits or four people saying, I want to tell you about this person named Jesus, right? And so if you were to write something about Jesus, what would you say? If we had 4 of you write for next week, anybody want an assignment, write a biography of Jesus. I bet you if we looked at it, none of you would lie. But one of you would be talking all about the parables and it was so impressive and whatever. And one of you wouldn't even talk about the parables because, I didn't think about that. That wasn't important to me. One of you would be talking about the cross and all the details of that. So we'd all be different, right? So you have a chart there, and you can fill it in rapidly if you want. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The author was a tax collector, an evangelist, working with Peter. Mark was an evangelist, a missionary working with Peter. Luke was a physician. Watch out for physicians when they write. Right? Always, all right? Pretty detailed. All right, fisherman. I mean, who could write? What fisherman could write? And John is like, I'm a fisherman, man. I don't have good English. But let me tell you about Jesus. I met this guy named Jesus. He changed my life. And I might not have good grammar, but I want you to know about this person because I'm not worried about my grammar. I'm worried about you finding about Jesus, right? So as you read them, they're all impressed. The audience would be, Matthew tended to write to the Jews, Mark to the Romans, Luke to the Greeks or Gentiles maybe, and John to all men. Anybody can read John. Interesting, the amount of the book of Matthew that's by Christ is 60%, then 42, 50, 50. That's may or may not interest you. Old Testament quotes. Matthew has the most. Mark has quite a few. Luke and John are tied or close at 25 and 20. Here's the next one, what's unique to Matthew? In other words, it's in Matthew, but it's not in any of the other Gospels. If you didn't read Matthew, you wouldn't have it. Well, 42% of Matthew is unique to Matthew. So if you get rid of Matthew, you lose 42% of what you know about Jesus, right? Or 42% of what he writes is that. Mark is only 7% unique. Luke is 59% unique. And John, he's just in another world. He's a fisherman. He's just telling you about Jesus and all the details of the discourses and all the details of the parables. And so he's just like, that's not important. Let me tell you about Jesus, right? I want you to know what he did for us or whatever. So the key word in Matthew would be the word that it might be fulfilled. So he's writing to Jewish people, and he's trying to convince them, this guy that I'm talking about named Jesus, he's your Messiah. And he quotes all things from the Old Testament. Said, you remember Zechariah said this? That it might be fulfilled. Jesus did it. So he's just proving to them, all your prophecies are fulfilled in this person called Jesus Christ. And his key word is that it might be fulfilled. And then Mark, it said he's all the Romans are always noted for action. Italians still do that, right? We all move fast. And so anyway, immediately Jesus, and immediately Jesus. He's always moving. He's just going. Luke is all about the Son of Man. He's totally human. Jesus was totally human. He is not just some mirage about a God. He was totally human. He was also totally God. And then, of course, John is all about belief. The key verse, we'll read them in a minute. Christ as sovereign, servant, Son of Man, and Savior. 4 biographies, each seen through the eyes of a different author. So there's real advantage to reading 4 biographies of George Washington, right? It's just 4 different observations of, George Washington. You want to know George Washington, you got to read a couple of them, right? You can't just read one. Written to different audiences. So if you're writing a biography of somebody and you're writing to that person's enemies, you'd be trying to prove whatever or trying to convince them or whatever your thoughts were. So different audiences against a different cultural background, but all focused on the same personal history of a man by the name of Jesus Christ. Matthew would say, tell the daughter of Zion, behold, your king is coming. He's now proven it by Matthew 21, that it might be fulfilled, that it might be fulfilled, that it might be fulfilled. Christ is your king. He's your Messiah. He's the one you've been looking for. He's here. He came. So Matthew, of course, wrote after the death and resurrection of Christ. But anyway, his whole point was Jesus was that person. And he's writing to Jews who needed to hear that. And you know that when Paul went out to preach, a lot of Jews got converted. And we can sometimes say the Jews were hard-hearted and whatever, but 50% of the Pharisees were saved. And a lot of Jews around that, 7% of the Roman Empire were Jewish people. A lot of them, wherever Paul went, people were getting saved. A lot of them were Jews. Matthew was Christ is our sovereign. Mark, 4. Sometimes my computer makes mistakes. I'm glad yours doesn't. But anyway, for even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many. So it's all about, to a Roman, the guy who does stuff is what counts. And Jesus did something. He wasn't just some king who sat there and said, serve me. He was the one who was constantly serving. And here's the greatest service he ever did. He gave his life a ransom for many. And Mark is trying to tell you that. Luke said, for the Son of Man has come to seek and to save that which is lost. And so the key phrase he would have is Son of Man. And of course, John would have, and truly Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written that you might believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. In that believing, you want to know why you ought to believe? You may have life in his name. So as you look at him, you realize the portraits of Jesus. He's the sovereign, The Jews needed to hear that. He is the Messiah. He's the one you were looking for. He is it, that it might be fulfilled. So I'll give you a couple numbers here. 15 times in Matthew it says that it might be fulfilled. All right? In the face of 2 or 3 witnesses, a truth is established. That's what the Old Testament taught, right? That's God's standard. So if you can get 2 or 3 witnesses, he's got 15. When it comes to the word immediately in the book of Mark, how many times do you think he said, now immediately? Behold, immediately. A lot. That's a great, safe answer, all right? Anybody want to be more specific? 36 times. So then immediately Jesus, he's a man of action. He was doing something. How about the word son, the phrase son of man? 31 by Luke. He just keeps pounding on it. He's the Son of Man. The Son of Man came. The Son of Man, Son of Man. And how many times the word believe or belief in the Gospel of John? Anybody for 98? 98, right? So you understand, they were enamored with Jesus. That's why you write a biography of someone, Either you hate him or love him, right? You either try to trash him or you try to I got to tell you about this guy named George Washington. He was quite a dude. He did this and this. That's why you write it. You want everybody else to know it. And these people, these 4 people, really wanted us to know Jesus. Because of that, we're able to understand it. You might wonder why 4? Well, you have greater evidence. You have greater elaboration. By 4 of them, I know more. Even though there's a lot of back and forth and things that are said in all 4 Gospels or said in 2 Gospels. And then finally, there's a greater emphasis by John on Jesus as the Christ, the Son of the living God. Now, our time is up, so I'm going to wait for the last thing next Wednesday when we come back. Because Matthew, Mark, and Luke are different than John. And if you've ever read Matthew, Mark, and Luke and then read John, you realize, these are biographies, and then there's John, right? And you'll love John, but he doesn't talk about the birth of Jesus, doesn't talk about a lot of things, right? It's like John is in a different world, right? So that means the first 3 kind of are similar. Mark is the short one. He's the Reader's Digest version. Remember when we used to get Reader's Digest? Those are the books I read, Reader's Digest, And that's why Mark, a lot of people say you ought to read John first. I think you ought to read Mark first. He just gets you there, gets it done, and gets going, right? He just nails all the important things. And he's short, he's fast, he's quick, he's the shortest one. But a lot of what he says, I think only, 7% of what he says is not found somewhere else. He doesn't have all this unique stuff. So that's created what's called the synoptic problem. So the synoptic Gospels are Matthew, Mark, and Luke. They're similar. One's a little bit longer. There's a few differences, but basically they're the same. They're telling you the life of Jesus. And John's in a different category. So when you think about the synoptic problem, which I don't think it's a problem for anybody here, I hope. But if you study the Gospels, you realize it's all they're going to talk about. So this is why if you go to a liberal seminary, all right, and study the life of Jesus, you'll spend all your time debating and discussing the synoptic problem. And I'm like, I don't need that. It's not an issue to me, all right? So the synoptic problem is, okay, where did Mark get all his information? Where did Matthew get his information? What do you think? Where did Luke get his information? What do you think? Let's debate that for a while, all right? Since only 7% of Mark is unique, some of us would conclude he read Matthew and Luke. But the rest of us would conclude, no, he was the first one to write. So he wrote Mark, and then Matthew copied most of it and added a few things, and Luke copied both of those 2 and added a few things. So you will go a whole semester talking about this. Who wrote first? Who copied who? Why did he add that? And it's called the synoptic problem. And as much as you go like, are you crazy? If you can write a book on the synoptic problem, it will get published and you'll make a lot of money. Because the publishers today are not interested in guys like Rich Van Heukelum, anybody like us. They don't care about us. But they love the synoptic problem. They love all that stuff. So the synoptic problem is who wrote who first, who was second, who copied who, how much of it. And they do that because they're trying to figure out what is true. So most of us believe it's all true. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, anybody believe any of it's not true? Right? So if it's found in all three of them, we're going to give it an A+, probably true. It's only found in two of them. I don't know. It's a B-. Only found in one of them. Pretty sure that one's not there, right? And where did Mark get it? Where did they come up with this stuff? Well, he got it from Q. You knew that, right? You know who Q is, right? Pardon me?
It was all Holy Spirit inspired.
Well, you're one of those conservative Christians. I don't know what's wrong with you. So they came up with Q, which is an unknown document that no one has ever seen, has never been found, but we all know there's something that they got it from. So it has to be a Q, or somebody else has an X. So they got all these weird things going on. And they would debate it forever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever and never come to a knowledge of the truth. But then you realize why they're doing it. Okay? It's to show that the vast majority of the Gospels is not true. So do you ever see the four-colored, some of us have red letter editions, right? Words of Jesus in red, and there's a little debate on some of that, but basically you can get that. You can nail that down if you read it carefully. But the four-color edition is all the words in red, we know they're not true. All the words in yellow, I might have the colors wrong, we're pretty sure they're not true, but I'm not 100% sure they're not true. All the words in green, we're pretty sure they're true, but we're not sure if they're true. And there's all the words in black, those are the ones we know for sure that Jesus said and are really true. So what percentage of their Bible is black? 0. 0. So anybody want to follow Jesus? Why would I follow anybody where everything written about him is not true? Or I don't know it's true. Why would I do that? Even the biographies of George Washington were written by men, and I'm sure there are mistakes in it somewhere, and somebody who's a good biographer would say, well, it wasn't 1840 or 17, whatever, it was this, whatever. I'm sure there are mistakes in those, but by and large, they're right, right? I learned from biographies of all these people, knowing that a few things might be wrong, but I still trust it all. But why would I possibly base my life on a man whose life is recorded 4 times and all of it's wrong?
Personal relationship.
Absolutely. And so when I went to Princeton, I said, I just want to sit in a class with, I could tell her name. She's very famous. She's on PBS all the time. Elaine Pagel. I just wanted to sit in a class with her. You can go in any building on Princeton University, but you cannot go into the seminary building. It's locked. And you cannot sit in on any class unless you're a student and you've been registered. I said, why not? I just want to sit. I just want to be in the same room with her once. And they won't let you. And you tell me why. Because they did not have a very good answer to me. But you can go into physics class and listen to a physics professor. You can go into a math class and listen to a math professor. You can go anywhere. It's all open. Seminary building. It's really strange.
What was their reason? They don't want to be challenged.
Exactly right. They don't say it that way. They don't want some of us to listen to her and then go out and say bad things about her. Because anybody who would want to listen to her probably is trying to critique her, and they know that. They're smart enough to know. If a guy like me goes there, I'm trying to figure out what she's really saying. So they wouldn't let any of us in. So that's the way it is. I hope, though, you realize as you read the Gospels, it's each of those men, they're just men. One's just a tax collector who got saved. You want to hear the life of Jesus through the eyes of a tax collector who got saved? I mean, he's the low of the low. That'd be cool. He's pretty excited about it. You want to hear the life of Jesus through someone who was just a servant? He was an evangelist. He just wanted you to get the message quickly. You want to hear the life of Jesus through somebody who was a physician, who's kind of a detailed person and gets it all right? How about the life of Jesus through the eyes of a man who just fell in love with Jesus and walked and talked with him, ate fish with him on the side of a thing? One time, this guy said, that's never going to happen, and, Jesus corrected him. And one time, he said, I defend you to the end. And Jesus said, no, you're not. And this guy failed. And then Jesus took him back. So I hope you read the Gospels and you understand that the whole purpose is for you to just be familiar with a person. His name is Jesus. So if our goal in life is to be like Jesus, here's a great thing you ought to do. Just read the Gospels again and 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 again. Every day. Just for a year, all you do is read Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. Just read it and let it. You know what's going to happen? Here's what happens when I read George Washington. My wife says, now you're trying to act like George Washington. Not me. And then I read Abraham Lincoln. I try to act like Abraham, I'm just so impressed with him. I want to be like him, right? Imagine just reading about Jesus. You'll be meek and lowly of heart. You'll be kind. You just become like him. Can't beat that. Sandra has something to say.
All of these men lived with Christ, and all of them had different opinions because their experiences were different.
Yes.
But isn't there an element that is impacted by God himself in the writing of the scripture?
Absolutely. That's where you have to always say, all Scripture is given by inspiration of God. It's profitable for doctrine and reproof. And God made sure these men wrote what he wanted written. And I'm sure, I know when I preach, I get done, I go home, I say, man, I forgot. You know how much I forget on Sunday morning? And I just say, well, Lord must have known I wasn't supposed to say that. He just, whatever. So I'm sure they thought, man, I should have put down the day we went fishing or whatever. So God is behind it all. That's why in the Bible there's always a divine, supernatural explanation for things, if you would. There's God. And then there's a natural. It's a story about a man. They wrote it down by men, right? So that sounds like a biography of George Washington. It is, but it isn't. It's totally different than the biography of George Washington, and you will know it. Doug?
Yes, while you're talking about all this, I'm reminded of the Jesus seminar.
Yeah.
I'm sure you're aware of it, but it's where they've sat around and they voted, these scholars voted on whether or not Jesus said this or he did not say that.
Yeah.
And they just discounted all the miracles, and basically it was by meeting religious leaders. One of them's in Phoenix, and I think there was 12 of them.
Yeah. There were 70 total. Yeah, and they were the one who came up with the four-colored Bible. John Dominic Crossan was the leader of it. Yeah. Good. Hey, you're way late for leaving. I'm sorry. Is Don looking for us? No, not really. Okay. Thank you for sitting. Next week we'll look at one of the things I really wanted to hit, which I didn't get to, making disciples Jesus' way, which is found in the Gospels. So just read the Gospels. Just read them and 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 read them. Some of you are analyzers and some of you try to get a harmony of the gospel like my friend Dr. Tan, but the rest of us just read it and enjoy it, and you'll be like Jesus. What a novel thought. Father, thank you for these four men who, under your inspiration, accurately put down the truths that they put down. So the message you wanted communicated is exactly what was communicated. And yet, in a sense, we realize these were just people that were enamored with Jesus, and they wanted us to learn about him. So thank you for that, and I pray that as we read the Gospels, we would become like Jesus. And we'll thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.